Hi, welcome to another episode of the Landlord Finance and Wellness course. My name is Kunle, and it's my pleasure to share a couple of lessons with you again today. Today, we'll be talking about property management finance. So basically, what are the things that come together in terms of revenue and costs that make up your profit, your profitability for your apartment? We divided this into two different episodes. So I'll start with revenue today, and the next episode we'll talk about cost. So let's talk about major revenues. The first one is obviously rent. And that's what tenants pay you to live in your apartment. And it's either they're paying monthly, or as we've seen in most parts of Nigeria, they're paying annually. In other parts of Africa, people actually pay rent monthly. And I'll talk a bit more about the advantages and disadvantages of these two options. The second revenue opportunity is what we call capital gains. And that's basically what you're getting as revenue when you sell your property in the future. So you have a house, you've run it for about 20 years, and you decide you want to sell it off at the profit, right? That's what we call capital gains revenue. For this episode, I'll focus a lot more on rent, which is what you get quite frequently. For capital gains, I'll share a couple of tips on how to make sure that you get the best out of revenue when you decide to sell your apartment. So let's start with rent. How do you set rent for your property? I've read different stories, landlords complaining about how low their rent is. And actually have a good example where a landlord didn't realize that he had to review his rent every 2 years. He found out about 10 years later that he was losing about 50% of his income. So a couple of tips. Number one is that you have to engage in research. And it has to be like continuous research. But initially, if you just build a property and it's going to the market, important thing to do is engage in research. Find out around your environment what the rent prices are for properties that are similar to yours. Don't assume. And then if you get those figures, it gives you an idea of where you should rent out your property at. Secondly, aesthetics. My experience is that while you're building your apartment, or even after you finish building, you should consider aesthetics that help to increase your rental revenue. Apartments that have swimming pools, for example, can charge about 30 or 40% extra of rent above the ones that don't have those facilities. And interestingly, the cost of setting up those facilities are very low compared to how much you can earn over a period of time. Another example I'll give, which is maybe, a lot more common, is the kind of ceilings you use, for example. Just making your ceiling a POP type ceiling can increase your rent value by 10 to 15% annually. And of course, it's just a one-off cost, right? And you just get the same return on investment every time. So I'll suggest that you consider, when you're thinking about revenue on your property that you already have, that you want to renovate, or a property you're just trying to get, you have to consider the aesthetics. What are the small things you can add to your apartment that can increase your revenue on that apartment by 10, 15, 20, or 30%? My final advice is to talk to professional quantity surveyors or property management companies when you're trying to fix rental prices. These are experts, and they know what the going rate is in the market, and they can give you the best possible advice when you're trying to set rent prices. Again, the important factor in all of this is that you have a property manager who has skin in the game and is thinking about what you earn. Is thinking about how much income comes to you at the end of the day. So while you're setting rental prices, I'd like to share, an important advice. Usually, when tenants come to you, they'll very likely negotiate rent. My suggestion is that you listen to them and you prioritize a tenant who you believe will keep your property in great shape. So, for example, you've set your rent to be 2.5 billion per annum. Example. You've got two options. One is a tenant who is willing to pay 2.5 million, and you're not sure how well they'll manage your apartment. And then you have an option of a tenant who is willing to spend or pay 2.3 million naira annually. But it's very clear from their tenant behavior in the past, right, or their tenancy behavior in the past, that they'll keep your property in good shape. My advice would go with the person who's willing to pay 2.3 million. And it's very simple. Usually, when people focus just on the higher rent, right, they miss the point that it costs more to renovate a bad property if the bad tenant sort of damages things. So yes, set the rent prices, but then negotiate based on the risk, right? Which tenant treat my apartment well, or I didn't like to damage my property. That was a tip I wanted to share before I move to the next thing. So we've spoken about, how to set rental revenue or how to set your rent. Next thing I'll talk about is when to increase rent. I gave an example earlier about the landlord who, for 10 years, was getting almost the same rent value from his tenant and just realized very late that he had made a mistake. My suggestion, and it's probably industry standard, that rent is reviewed every 2 years. And then if it's a case of a new tenant moving in, it's reviewed just before a tenant moves in. So what that means is that if you have an apartment where there's a sitting tenant and it's been there for 2 years, it's time to review the rent. Review doesn't mean you're increasing. It just means you're checking to ensure that you're not losing money. And if you realize you're losing money, then you need to increase it. The second option is, of course, the case where a tenant has stayed in your apartment and just moved out. And even if you increase it last year, if the costs have gone up in that area, then it's also an opportunity to also increase it again. My suggestion, though, would be to review as regularly as possible. And when I say review again, I don't mean increase as regular as possible. I mean just keep abreast of what it costs to build a new house in your area, what it costs to run a new house in your area, what the going rent is in your area, right? The right property manager can help you do this, just by the way. But if you have the time to do it, please do it and ensure that you're not losing money and you're getting value for your assets. Because most property managers can forget that it's time to review prices. We set up a tool on Good Tenant that automatically reminds property managers that it's time to review the rent every 2 years. Usually, when you have a tenant in an apartment, to increase rent for that apartment, you have to give them 6 months notice. That's what the law asks you to do. In many cases, property managers only remember that they need to increase the rent a month to renewal because they just realize that, rent is about to expire. So we created a system to ensure that 7 months before it be close to 2 years that you've not reviewed, a reminder comes to the property manager. And so we encourage you to get property managers who use Good Tenants, for example, or tools that help to remind them that they need to help you get the best value for your apartment. Finally, I'm sure you've heard a lot of people talk about monthly rents, annual rent, and what are the pros and cons. I'll just share a bit about that. If you have an apartment in a location that is very close to, the business district, whether it's in Lagos or in Nairobi, you might consider putting them up for monthly rent because there's potentially a lot of expatriates going in and coming out of the country. Of course, it means that these apartments have facilities, like 24 hours power for it to make sense for these expatriates or very mobile professionals who don't mind paying monthly. But then if these apartments are in locations that are maybe far away from business districts, then I guess you don't have so much choice apart from just making annual rent. The other thing to consider is risk. Obviously, you're more likely to earn more money if your tenants are paying monthly because they don't have to pay bulk sum. So, for example, it's possible to charge 2 million naira per month for rent of an apartment, but charge 250,000 naira monthly, which comes to 300 naira at the end of the year. People will pay monthly because it's sort of monthly. The risk, though, there is that they can move out, anytime. So it means that you potentially have vacancies in between the year. Whereas for the annual rent, you are sure that you've gotten revenue for the year. My advice is to do the maths. In cases where I've managed properties where we've done monthly rent in the past, we've made sure that we've gotten our rent for the year in about 6 to 8 months. What that means is that we can potentially get the apartment vacant for 4 months and to not affect the numbers. So there's important to do those numbers. And I know that it's becoming popular. Monthly rent, Airbnb apartments are becoming popular. Please make sure you do your math so that you don't end up losing money when there are many vacancies versus actually doing what is very safe, the annual rent style. Thank you so much for watching this episode. If you want us to help you do your maths, or if you want to get advice on whether you should do monthly rent, annual rent, or if you just have concerns about your rent prices, remember that you can always reach out to us to set up a one-on-one advisory call. I will be willing to share and learn from the experience talking to you.